We've been looking at a new book in the Bible, started last week, the story of the Judges. And the story of Judges is a really exciting story because you get lots of battles and lots of exciting happenings. But more than that, you learn some wonderful lessons about God, because the Bible is the book that tells us about God, what he is like, what he does, and what we should do. So we're going to look at the story of Gideon in the Bible today, and it starts with some very bad news. The people of God had set up idols. You see that thing on the screen there? That was a god called Baal. And they used to think that Baal was the one who gave them rain and crops. But of course, all Baal was just a statue. And there's the people of Israel there, one of them bowing down and praying to Baal. And do you know what? That breaks the first of God's commands, because God said, "You shall have no other gods before me." There are no other gods. He's just a piece of wood. So they shouldn't be bowing down to him. Well, because they turned away from God and were worshipping Baal, God sent the Midianites and the Amalekites, fierce warriors, into the land. They used to ride camels, and they had very sharp swords, and they would come, and they were able to conquer the Israelites. You see, boys and girls, older people, when we turn away from God, we get into trouble. And it was 7 long years. And then they prayed. And they said, "Lord, we've made a mistake. We've messed it up. We've turned away from you, and we're worshipping these false gods." And you know, when you pray like that and you're sorry, God hears. God sent his angel. Now, it just looked like another man. But in fact, we're going to see in a few minutes, it was a messenger from God. And actually, it was a very special messenger from God. And he was sitting under a tree when Gideon was threshing wheat. Now, Gideon shouldn't have been doing that, because the Amalekites had said anyone who threshes wheat, they would get into trouble. So he put it in the winepress to hide it. But he was threshing the wheat. And the angel called him a mighty man of valor. He said, "The Lord is with you." And Gideon said, "Well, if God's with us, why are we into such trouble with all of these Amalekites coming and taking our food?" And the angel said, "You've got to go, and you can deliver the people." Well, Gideon said, "Let me bring an offering. We'll make an offering to God." And he went and got some food ready, some meat, and a broth. He made a broth, and he poured it out on a rock. And then just at that moment, something happened that had never, ever happened before. The angel, or the messenger from God, he put his staff out like that, and he touched the meat, and the fire came out of the rock and burned up the sacrifice. Wow, it was a miracle. And Gideon realized this wasn't just an ordinary man. This wasn't just a prophet. In actual fact, he realized he'd seen God face to face. Boys and girls, do you know what? God had sent his own son, not as a man, but in the form of an angel called the angel of the Lord, who'd come down to see the people and answer to their prayers. So Gideon built an altar and he worshipped the Lord. There he was, worshipping God. Well, the next thing that happened was God said to him, "I want you to go and throw down the altar of Baal." So Gideon got 10 of his father's servants, and they went at night because they were afraid, and they smashed down the altar. And they got the Baal, and they put it on a fire, and they made another offering to God. And that's what happened. Throw down the altar of Baal. They had to get rid of the sin before God could do the blessing. And that's what we need to learn from this story. We have to get rid of wrong things so that God can bless us in our lives. Throw down the altar of Baal. Well, what happened next was all the men of the town, they were Baal worshippers, and they came to Gideon's dad and they said, "Bring out Gideon, we're going to kill him." And his dad said, "Listen, if Baal is a god, Why don't you let Baal kill him? And all the people went away grumbling. And of course nothing happened because Baal isn't a god. He's got no power. Gideon lived, and all the people in the town realized that Baal was just nothing. He was just a piece of wood. So the next thing that happened, the enemy came. The enemy invaded, but not just 1 or 2 or 10,000 or 20,000. 135,000 men came. That's the size of a football crowd in Anfield and a football crowd at the new stadium. All coming into the land, all armed, all ready to kill. So Gideon called an army together, blew a trumpet, and he gathered an army together. But it was nowhere near the size of this army. And God said to Gideon, he says, you're going to be the one who's going to deliver the people. Now, Gideon believed in God, but you know what? He wasn't sure. Do you ever feel like that? You believe in God, but you're not sure. Well, he wasn't sure. So he prayed and he said, Lord, he got a lamb's fleece, like a fleece of wool. You see it there. And he prayed and he said, Lord, if you're going to save Israel through me, I'm going to put this fleece on the ground and go to sleep. And when I wake up the next morning, I want the fleece to be soaked and the ground to be dry. Okay? We put the fleece out, dry, and he fell asleep. And the next morning when he got up, sure enough, the fleece, he was able to wring out a bucket of water from the fleece. It was soaked, and all the other ground was dry. So that was a sign from God that God was with him. But you know what? He did have faith, but it wasn't very big. And he said, Lord, can you do it again? And he said, this time, he said, I'm going to put the fleece out, and I want the fleece to be dry and all the ground around to be wet. Well, that couldn't happen, could it? But that's what he prayed. And he went to sleep. The next day when he got up and he went to see the fleece, guess what? It was dry, but all the other ground was wet. So he knew that God was going to do a great thing. He knew that God had answered prayer. He knew that God had heard his prayer, and he knew that God was going to help him fight the Amalekites. So he went down to look at their tents. There they are, 135,000 people. And Gideon was now ready to face them because he was trusting in God. And you know, boys and girls, mums and dads, older people, we need to trust in God. That's how God gives us his blessing, when we trust our way in him. And if you want to find out what happened next in that battle, you've got to come back next week for the next exciting installment. Over to John after the Sunday